It's Grandmaster Pragnananda taking on Robert Hovhannisyan at the FIDE World Cup 2025. Pragnananda had a very tough round 2 where he was pushed to the limit by Temur Kuibakarov, and now in the third round he takes on the very strong Armenian Grandmaster Robert Hovhannisyan. In the first game they drew. It was quite a solid draw from Pragg with the black pieces in the e4 e5 4 knights, and now the second game is here. Pragg has the white pieces and will be looking to fight. Sometimes when you have really tough rounds in the initial rounds of the World Cup, it becomes quite interesting and exciting for you to play forward, because you kind of lost all your sense of tension. You faced it all, and so maybe that's what Pragg is going through. Yeah, like he's kind of was on the brink of elimination in the second round. But let's see how he plays here. In the third round he is opening the game with pawn to e4. Robert Hovhannisyan, known for his absolute solidity, plays pawn to e5, and Pragg brings his knight out, attacking the pawn on e5. And let's see what Robert does. Well, he goes for the Petrov. The Petrov is considered as one of the most solid openings out there. What is Pragg's decision going to be here? He goes for d4. Knight takes e4. We saw Hari Krishna playing d takes e5 and this bishop c5 queen d5 line. Pragg goes for the more solid setup with bishop d3 attacking the knight. The pawn moves forward, defending the knight on e4. You pick up the pawn on e5, and it can be complete symmetry with bishop d6, but he goes knight d7. Now taking on d7 is the main line, but Pragg castles here, and Robert now takes on e5. Knight takes on e5, and this leads to a very interesting structure where white has a kingside majority here, black has a queenside majority here. Knight to c5 attacking the bishop, and Pragg says, I want to keep the bishop on the board. For Robert, maybe the best idea is to go bishop e7 and short castles here. He plays it. He plays his bishop out to e7, and Pragg has a kingside majority, so you can start pushing the pawn here. First bishop e3, he develops his bishop. Maybe you will get his knight out to d2, c3, black castles here, and now Pragg plays pawn to c3, just making sure that if you play knight d2 directly, then d4 can come in. So first c3, just taking into control the d4 square, and black goes b6. Now this has been played before between Sindarov and Fedosiev in Abu Dhabi Masters 2023. Pragg goes knight to d2. In that game c4 was played instead of knight d2. Knight d2 very logical. Bishop comes out to b7 for Hovhannisyan, and Pragg starts his kingside play with f4. A very logical move, gaining space here, and Hovhannisyan can strike in the center with f6. He does that. If you take here, I believe bishop takes f6, and black can be very happy with his position. The e4 square is very weak. b4 played by Pragg, and now an important move for black. Knight e6 is very important, but he goes knight e4. Now it's possible that to knight e6 you are worried about f5 attacking the knight, but you have the counter attacking move d4. But once you play knight e4, Pragg absolutely is ready for it. He takes on e4, de, and now the best move is queen b3 check. You will also have bishop c4 check. He plays queen to b3, and now the main issues here are that the e4 pawn could potentially become weak. Also, the light squares in the black camp, just look at this entire diagonal, are quite weak. So rook a d8. By the way, just to tell you, bishop d5 doesn't work because of bishop c4. When you take, then the e4 pawn hangs. So rook d1, queen comes to e8. Now very tempting is to push the pawn to e6. And Pragg does it. Pawn to e6 with the idea of pushing f5. So very logical now is to push your own pawn to f5. Connecting these two pawns, asking black that your own pawn on e6 is alone. Rook jumps into d7. Now the rook puts pressure here also on the c7 pawn. And look at this beautiful move found by Robert Hovhannisyan. Now if you take the pawn on c7, I have bishop e6, queen e6 and bishop c5 attacking here. But instead he goes rook d1. And now maybe a small inaccuracy there. I think Pragg had bishop h5, which was an insanely good move. If you take, I have rook e7. If you play g6, I will have some bishop d4 check ideas eventually in this line. But anyway, let's get back to the game. Rook f d1 was played by Pragg. Bishop takes rook, rook takes d7. So you're now exchanged down, c5 played. And the idea of this move is to control the d4 square. Pragg pushes b5, and this is a very long term pawn idea. Like the idea is to play a4 a5, bishop f6, and Pragg is essentially saying I have a pawn on e6, rook on d7, and I believe in my material there. a4 played, and now queen g6, another good move by Robert Hovhannisyan. I think Pragg is being put under the test. a5, nice move. If you take ba, then I can take bishop c5 and I have these strong pawns. So he plays rook to e8, attacking the pawn on e6, a6. Very interesting move, but actually turns into a tactical blunder perhaps, because black has a very strong move here, bishop h4, attacking this pawn here. But instead Robert goes rook e7. We'll try to analyze that move deeper subsequently, but rook e7 played, and Praggnanandhaa now can bring his queen into d5. He does it. Queen to d5, threatening queen b7, and now you see the power of the a6 pawn. So Robert tries to stop it, but this is a mistake. In fact, rook e8 and queen b7 and rook e6, queen a7 should have been tried. It's also a very complicated position, but he goes rook b8, and now Pragg can take on e7, bishop e7, and queen to d7. This is just a finishing stroke here. Very powerful move, because now I'm attacking your pawn, I'm attacking your bishop. He goes queen e8, which looks logical, but after queen takes a7, just the a pawn and the e pawn are just so strong. Queen d8 taking control of the d file, but there are just no entry points here. And Pragg even finds time to bring his king into the center with king f2. Robert goes bishop d6, defending the rook, maybe preparing queen e7. If the queens are traded, should be happy here, because the bishops don't have too much scope. And Pragg now finds a very good move, queen f7. So the idea of this move, queen f7, is to prepare a7, queen h4 check, attacking the h2 pawn, and now king f1. Well, f4 is a bit soft, but unfortunately to this, e7 is winning. So he goes rook f8, and Pragg plays another good move, queen b7. So Pragg is very clear. Queen h2 taken. Again, remember, if bishop takes f4, you have e7, which is very strong. So he plays here, and Pragg goes e7. Robert goes rook g8. If you went rook e8, I have a7, which is winning. So he goes rook g8. He makes a queen. What a beautiful move by Pragg. Gives up the queen, and now a double attack there with queen to d7. Beautiful. Attacking the rook and the bishop, and this is over. Rook has to move, and now a very good move, queen d6. So now you have two bishops for a rook and also the a pawn. The rest should not be very difficult. He comes back, queen d2, queen h4, trying to control the d8 square to prepare rook d8. And another excellent move here. The bishop will block on d5, then I can play c4, and the bishop also controls the queening square with a7, a8. Pragg being super alert here to make sure he makes no errors. Bishop d5, queen h1 check, and now, well, bg1 should win. Also king f2 should win. He goes bishop g1 and gets up from the chair as 40 moves are completed. There was some time trouble, but I think Pragnananda always had things under control. Robert Hovhannisyan, well, he can figure out what to do here. Queen h6, trying to get the queen in here, but what to do about a7? I think it's just finish, because yeah, he plays a7, queen comes to d6, attacking d5 and f4. I mean, I want to queen, but rook 8, bishop 8, I'll lose my queen here. So Pragg defends the queen and prepares a8 when you will lose the rook. And so Robert Hovhannisyan resigns here. Pragnananda wins a classy game, I must say. This is actually a very, very strong and powerful game by Pragg. In fact, some of the moves which were amazing was this queen side pawn push, with b5, a4, a5, a6 to kind of build the position, was very, very deep and beautiful by Pragg. And yeah, we'll see how things pan out for Pragg in this tournament. But after a very tough second round, Pragg has moved in confidently to round number 3. And now in round number 4, he will face a strong opponent, which will be the winner of Georg Mayer and Daniel Dubov. I want to draw your attention to this position where Pragnananda started this amazing play with the pawn push to e6. Pawn to f5, and now jumped in with the rook to d7. When the bishop attacked it, these tactics were very beautiful, where if you take rook c7, there is bishop e6, queen e6 and bishop c5. Because when you take the queen, I have an intermezzo check and then I pick it up. So black is completely fine here. That's the reason why Pragg played the move rook fd1. But there was actually a very powerful move, bishop h5 here. And this shows how rich chess is. Because if you take queen h5, I go rook e7 and I'm better here as white. But if you have to play the move g6, it now weakens the dark squares here. And in the same line that we looked at after rook c7, bishop e6, queen e6, bishop c5, I can now take bishop c5, queen takes e6, and now I have a check. And this actually is winning for me, because king g8 is met with rook g7 and rook g6, and rook f6 is met with just calmly bringing the bishop back, and this is a very, very difficult position to play. In fact, even bd1 with the idea of bishop b3 is very, very powerful. That being said, Pragg played rook fd1, takes, he's now an exchange down, a complete exchange down. c5 was a good move, and now this move b5. I thought this was the most creative sort of phase of the game, where you play a4. I mean, your pawn is on a2, right? To actually foresee that the pawn will go to a6 and eventually win the game just shows Pragg's genius here. Queen g6, good move by Hovhannisyan. a5, rook fe8, another good move, and a6. This was too ambitious by Pragg, And now the winning move here for black was bishop h4. The point is that you just want to get the bishop out to attack the e6 pawn, and I'm threatening queen takes e6. So the most logical move is bishop c4. But now I play rook e d8, and that's a very powerful move. And the point that has been made is that the queen can no longer go to d5. So let's say I start with rook e d8, you can come queen d5, and the queen is very powerful here, exerting influence. But once you play bishop h4, attack here, force bishop c4, and now rook d8. And now if you play, by the way, queen d1, just trying to play this move, then I can even take here, which is a nice move. I can even play just queen f6 with the idea of taking, eventually getting to d8. And you can see the back rank is definitely now a small issue that happens. Like for example, g3. Now the c3 pawn is weak, queen takes c3 is hanging, and so on. So bishop h4, a tough move, but actually the main idea is to attack here. He missed it. He played rook e7, and now Pragg got in. And I think the final mistake happened with rook b8, and now Pragg was all over his opponent. And this final phase of the game where he took on a7 and had this huge asset was kind of dealt with beautifully by Pragg. He calculated this entire phase so well, where you give up the e7 pawn and bring your queen and then eventually win the game.